August 16, 1940, 20,000 feet over Southampton. Flight Lieutenant James Nicholson squeezed the throttle forward, metal cold against his palm. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 ahead was pulling away. Not slowly, decisively. The German pilot glanced back once, then opened his throttle. Within seconds, the gap widened to 100 yards, then 200. Nicholson's Hurricane shuddered at maximum speed, engine howling. The airspeed indicator showed 290 miles per hour. Everything the aircraft had. The Messerschmitt was doing 320, maybe more. The gap became a gulf. Another German fighter escaped. And in that moment, watching the enemy shrink into the haze, Nicholson understood something that terrified him more than any bullet. His Hurricane couldn't catch them. Not today. Not ever. Before we dive deeper into this story, if you're finding this fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated with more incredible historical tales. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community around the world. Your support helps us keep bringing these untold stories to light. This wasn't one pilot's bad luck. This was mathematics. Cold, brutal, unchangeable mathematics. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 Emil could achieve 342 miles per hour in level flight at 15,000 feet. The Hurricane Mark I managed 316 on a good day. That 26-mile-per-hour difference meant German pilots controlled every engagement. They attacked when conditions suited them. They vanished when things turned dangerous. Squadron commanders read the combat reports with mounting dread. Pursued enemy aircraft for 2 minutes before he drew out of range. Closed to 400 yards but could not decrease distance further. The language was clinical. The frustration beneath it was visceral. These weren't poorly trained pilots, their courage was unquestionable. The aircraft simply couldn't do what was being asked of them. The Supermarine Spitfire performed better, capable of 362 miles per hour at 19,000 feet. But Fighter Command had fewer than 300 Spitfires serviceable in August 1940. They had nearly 600 Hurricanes. The Hurricane was the workhorse of the Battle of Britain, destined to shoot down more German aircraft than all other defenses combined. But in those desperate summer weeks, Hurricanes were being asked to catch Messerschmitts in stern chases. And they physically couldn't. The casualties mounted, not always from being shot down. The real killer was positional disadvantage. When you can't catch an enemy who's running, you can't force him to fight on your terms. German pilots made diving attacks on Hurricane formations, fired a burst, then escaped before British fighters could retaliate. The Hurricanes were trapped in a defensive posture. By mid-August, Hurricane squadrons were reporting something worse than casualties: morale problems. Pilots felt they were flying obsolete aircraft against a superior enemy. Some questioned whether they could win this battle when their primary fighter couldn't even catch the opposition. The boffins at Farnborough knew the problem. The Air Ministry knew. Every pilot and ground crew member knew. The Hurricane was too slow. Except there was a solution. The answer sat right in front of every ground crew member. That massive three-bladed de Havilland constant speed propeller, 11 feet in diameter, spinning at over 2,000 revolutions per minute. The propeller was a masterpiece of engineering, capable of automatically adjusting its blade angle to maintain optimal engine speed. But it had a fatal limitation built into its guts. The de Havilland constant speed unit used a hydraulic mechanism to change propeller blade pitch. Fine pitch for takeoff and climbing, coarse pitch for high-speed level flight. The system worked beautifully within its designed parameters. The trouble was, those parameters had been set in 1938 during peacetime testing. The propeller mechanism included physical stops inside the hub that prevented the blades from rotating beyond certain angles. Maximum coarse pitch was limited to prevent overspeeding the propeller. Conservative, safe, and slow. Engineering officers understood the aerodynamics. In level flight at altitude, you wanted the coarsest pitch possible. Think of it like gearing on a bicycle. Fine pitch was low gear, brilliant for acceleration, but useless for top speed. Coarse pitch was high gear, essential for maximum velocity. Flight sergeants like Harold Bunny Roos at No. 17 Squadron had done the calculations on cigarette packets. If you could increase the coarse pitch stop by just 3 or 4 degrees, you'd reduce propeller drag substantially. Less drag meant more speed. Possibly 10 miles per hour. Possibly 15. Maybe 20. That might be enough to let a hurricane catch a Bf-109. It might save lives. But Air Ministry regulations absolutely forbade unauthorized modifications to aircraft systems. Air Publication 129 was crystal clear. Any alteration to engine or propeller settings required written authorization from the Air Ministry's Directorate of Technical Development. The modification had to be tested at Farnborough, evaluated for safety, documented in proper orders. The process typically took 6 months minimum. The reasoning was sound. You couldn't have squadrons randomly adjusting critical systems based on hunches. The de Havilland Company had set those propeller stops after extensive testing. Moving them meant operating outside the tested envelope. It might overstress the hub. It might cause catastrophic blade failure at high speed, sending metal through the cockpit. Or it might work perfectly and save dozens of pilots. Flight sergeants would stand under hurricane wings, staring at those propeller hubs, knowing that inside was a simple mechanical stop that could be adjusted in 45 minutes with basic tools. 45 minutes of work that was absolutely, explicitly, career-endingly forbidden. The penalty could mean court-martial, reduction in rank, even imprisonment, and so they did nothing. Until they couldn't stand doing nothing anymore. Flight Sergeant James Fitter made the decision around midnight on August 22, 1940, at No. 17 Squadron's dispersal at Martlesham Heath. He'd watched 2 more pilots return that afternoon with the same story. Got close. Jerry opened throttle. Couldn't catch him. One of those pilots was 20 years old. The boy's hands were shaking from sheer frustration at being outrun by an enemy he could see but never reach. Fitter walked out to Hurricane L-1842 with a toolbox and a torch. The modification wasn't complicated if you knew what you were doing. Remove the spinner dome, 8 screws, access the pitch change mechanism. The critical component was a small collar with a metal pin that acted as the physical stop. That pin was set at the factory to limit blade angle to approximately 23 degrees in coarse pitch. What Fitter did was simple and completely illegal. He removed the stop collar, took it to the workshop, and filed down the metal stop pin by roughly 3 millimeters. Then he reassembled everything. The modification took 47 minutes. When finished, the propeller blades could now rotate to approximately 26 degrees in coarse pitch. 3 degrees flatter than de Havilland intended. The test flight happened at dawn. Fitter told Flying Officer Peter Dowding exactly what had been done. Dowding had 2 choices: report the unauthorized modification, or take the aircraft up and see what happened. Dowding chose the latter. He climbed to 15,000 feet, leveled off, opened the throttle fully. The airspeed indicator climbed past 300 miles per hour, then past 310, 315, 320. The needle settled at 328 miles per hour. Dowding nearly shouted before remembering that would be evidence. He brought L-1842 down and walked over to Fitter. 12 miles per hour faster than my usual kite. Straight and level, engine temperature normal, no vibration, no abnormal sounds. Then he added, do the rest of them. That night, Fitter and 2 other flight sergeants modified 6 more Hurricanes. By dawn on August 23rd, No. 17 Squadron had 7 illegally modified fighters, externally identical to every other Hurricane in Fighter Command, but capable of speeds the Air Ministry would have insisted were impossible. The real test came 2 days later when Flight Lieutenant Gordon Sinclair caught a Bf-109 that had strafed a convoy off Harwich. The Messerschmitt pilot did his usual trick, spotted the Hurricane and opened throttle to run. But this time the Hurricane stayed with him. Sinclair closed from 600 yards to 400, then 300, then 200. At 150 yards, he opened fire. The Bf-109 went into the North Sea trailing smoke. Sinclair returned, shut down, and asked for Flight Sergeant Fitter by name. When Fitter arrived, Sinclair simply said, "Whatever you did to my aircraft, it works." Word spread quietly. A flight sergeant from No. 17 Squadron would run into a mate from No. 32 Squadron at the parachute depot. The conversation would drift toward aircraft performance. "Your Hurricanes seem to be catching Jerry more often lately." A pause. "Yeah, we made a small adjustment to the pitch stops. Nothing official. And just like that, another squadron had the information. By early September 1940, at least 9 Hurricane squadrons had modified their propellers without authorization. Number 32 Squadron at Biggin Hill, Number 85 Squadron at Castle Camps, Number 111 Squadron at Croydon. The modifications happened at night before the first scramble, when engineering officers were less likely to be poking around. Every squadron knew they were snapping regulations clean in half. If an Air Ministry inspection team showed up and checked propeller hub settings, every flight sergeant involved would face immediate charges. So ground crews developed an informal early warning system. Station adjutants usually knew when inspectors were scheduled. A friendly word, and suddenly a squadron's Hurricanes would develop mysterious propeller issues requiring hubs to be removed. Modified stop collars would be swapped to factory specification for a day or two. Inspectors would check, find everything in order, and leave. The modified collars would go back in that night. Pilots knew exactly what had been done. Combat reports were carefully worded to avoid mentioning unusual speeds. Instead of achieved 325 miles per hour, a pilot might write, successfully maintained contact with enemy aircraft during extended chase. Squadron commanders faced an impossible choice. They knew modifications were happening. They could see combat results improving. More Messerschmitts caught, more successful interceptions. But officially acknowledging it meant either stopping the modifications or watching their flight sergeants get court-martialed. Most commanders chose willful blindness. The combat report from Flying Officer Eric Mars of No. 1 Squadron, dated August 26th, mentioned casually that he'd pursued a Bf-109 for approximately 4 minutes at full throttle. 4 minutes. Previous month reports showed Hurricane pilots typically lost contact within 90 seconds. Something had changed, and results were showing in Fighter Command's daily tally sheets. On August 30th, No. 85 Squadron claimed 3 Bf-109 fighters destroyed over Kent. All 3 shot down during stern chases. The pattern became unmistakable through September. Squadrons with modified aircraft were claiming more Bf-109 kills during pursuit engagements. The difference was stark enough that some commanders began quietly requesting aircraft transfers from units with better performance. The secret lasted until October 12, 1940. Wing Commander Thomas Prickman from the Air Ministry's Directorate of Technical Development arrived at Tangmere for routine inspection. Prickman was thorough and deeply knowledgeable about propeller systems. He'd spent 3 years at de Havilland before the war. When he measured blade angle on the 3rd Hurricane, his protractor showed 26 degrees at maximum course pitch. The specification was 23 degrees. He checked 4 more aircraft, all 26 degrees. He walked to the engineering office and asked Flight Sergeant Ronald Davis directly, "Who authorized the modification to your propeller pitch stops?" Davis considered lying, then decided against it. "Nobody authorized it, sir. We did it ourselves." Mid-August. Prickman's face went through several expressions before settling on something between fury and disbelief. "You violated Air Publication 1 and 29 and placed every pilot at risk." The investigation expanded rapidly. Within 3 days, technical officers had visited 14 Hurricane squadrons. They found modified propellers at 11 of them. Somewhere between 200 and 300 aircraft had been altered without permission. Flight sergeants across Fighter Command waited nervously for consequences. Air Vice Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory received the investigation report on October 16th. He read it twice, then did something unexpected. He requested combat performance data comparing units with modified propellers against those with standard specifications. The results were striking. Squadrons with modified aircraft showed a 37% higher success rate in Bf-109 engagements requiring pursuit. They also showed 0 propeller or reduction gear failures attributable to the modification. Lee Mallory passed the data to Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, Commander-in-Chief of Fighter Command. Dowding had just fought the largest air battle in history with inadequate resources and won by the narrowest margin. His Hurricane squadrons had been essential, but handicapped by performance limitations. Now someone was telling him that unauthorized modifications by flight sergeants had solved a critical tactical problem without causing mechanical failures. The decision wasn't difficult. On October 23, 1940, the Air Ministry issued Air Ministry Order A-43, officially authorizing the modification to propeller pitch stops on all Hurricane Mark I aircraft. The order included detailed specifications suspiciously similar to what flight sergeants had been doing for 2 months. The order contained no mention of the unauthorized modifications that prompted it. Flight Sergeant James Fitter received a commendation for exceptional technical initiative. He was never officially told his illegal work had prompted the order. But when he read the specifications, he recognized his own measurements. Several other flight sergeants received similar commendations. None faced court-martial. The closest to official acknowledgement came when Dowding visited No. 17 Squadron in November and mentioned casually to Fitter, "I understand your engineers have been rather creative with propeller settings. Good work." The full story didn't emerge until 1946. Royal Aircraft Establishment engineer Dennis Bancroft was conducting post-war propeller performance analysis. He had access to de Havilland's original 1938 calculations and combat performance records. What he discovered was both embarrassing and illuminating. The factory pitch stop settings had been based on a mathematical error nobody caught during peacetime testing. De Havilland's engineers had calculated propeller loads using sea-level air density figures when calculating blade loading at 15,000 feet. Air density at 15,000 feet is roughly 70% of sea level. The actual aerodynamic forces at altitude were significantly lower than calculations predicted. The original engineers had been conservative, appropriate for peacetime. But at operational altitudes where hurricanes actually fought, those conservative limits were excessively cautious. The blades could safely handle much coarser pitch than stops allowed. The flight sergeants who'd filed down stop pins hadn't known they were correcting a calculation error. They'd simply known from experience that propellers could take more. Bancroft's report filed in March 1946 concluded, "Field modifications implemented during combat operations inadvertently corrected for excessive design margins in the original specifications. In plain language, the flight sergeants had been right, and peacetime engineers had been overcautious." The modified pitch stops actually represented closer to optimal performance than factory specifications. The modified Hurricanes didn't win the Battle of Britain by themselves. That victory came from radar, courageous pilots, tactical brilliance, German mistakes, and dozens of other factors. But the propeller modification mattered. It mattered in specific engagements when a Hurricane caught a Bf-109 that would otherwise have escaped. It mattered when pilots stopped feeling helpless and started feeling they had a fighting chance. 12 miles per hour doesn't sound like much, but in combat at 20,000 feet, it was the difference between watching an enemy disappear and closing to firing range. It was the difference between a Messerschmitt pilot feeling invulnerable and feeling hunted. Small margins create psychological effects far beyond their technical specifications. When Luftwaffe pilots realized they could no longer automatically outrun Hurricanes, they became more cautious, less aggressive, more likely to break off attacks early. That caution cost them initiative, and initiative cost them the battle. The modification's real significance lies in where it came from. Not from the Air Ministry, not from Farnborough, not from de Havilland's engineering department. It came from flight sergeants standing under aircraft wings, watching pilots return frustrated and deciding that regulations mattered less than results. This was innovation from the bottom up, driven by people who understood both technical systems and operational reality. The RAF in 1940 had every structural reason to resist unauthorized modifications. The regulations were sensible. The potential for disaster was real. But the organization recognized when rules were causing more harm than good. When Lee Mallory and Dowding saw the data, they didn't reflexively defend regulations. They looked at results, verified safety, and legitimized what ground crews had been doing illegally for months. That flexibility saved lives. By November 1940, when Air Ministry Order A743 made the modification official, the Battle of Britain was effectively over. The Luftwaffe had switched to night bombing, conceding daylight air superiority was unachievable. Those modified Hurricanes continued fighting through 1941 and 1942, gradually replaced by later marks. The propeller modification became standard, unremarkable. Just another specification in technical manuals. But for a few critical weeks in summer 1940, it was forbidden, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. The men who made it happen knew they were risking everything: court-martial, imprisonment, career destruction. They did it anyway because they understood something peacetime regulations couldn't capture. Sometimes survival requires breaking the rules, and sometimes the people closest to the problem know the solution better than anyone in an office miles away. History remembers the pilots who flew the hurricanes. It should also remember the flight sergeants who made them fast enough to matter.